the invitation to pretend the city glimmered beneath the fading gold of evening, as if every skyscraper had decided to compete with the stars before night truly began. Emma Linton stood at her apartment window watching the lights flicker on one by one, her reflection merging with the skyline like a ghost of two worlds, one of dreams. In one of reality, she was dressed in her work blouse still, sleeves rolled up, her hair tied loosely, the faint exhaustion of a long week lingering on her face. The folder on her small coffee table lay open, unfinished reports, half-done proposals and reminders of everything she had yet to achieve. She sighed, pressing her lips together, trying not to think of what tomorrow would bring. But it was useless, because she already knew. Tomorrow was the annual Alderaan Foundation Gala, the most prestigious event in the city's corporate world, a gathering where CEOs, investors, philanthropists, and high-profile media figures would appear under a chandelier of gold light. Dressed in confidence and wealth, it was the kind of event that didn't belong in her life, yet somehow, fate had decided to play a cruel joke this time. Her colleague and closest friend, Leela, had waved 2 invitations in front of her earlier that morning, saying, "You have to come with me, Emma. It's not just networking. It's destiny. And trust me, you deserve a night out of spreadsheets at first." Emma had refused. She wasn't made for that kind of world. Not when her best dress came from a clearance sale and her purse was 3 years old. But Leela's grin had turned mischievous as she added, "Oh, did I mention Derek will be there?" And that name had frozen Emma mid-step. Derek Hale, the man she had once planned her future with, the one who said he needed someone more aligned with his ambitions, walked out of her life for a woman whose family owned 3 hotels and a yacht dealership. It had been almost a year, yet the sting hadn't fully faded. There were nights she still woke up remembering his words, and the cold way he looked at her when he said she wasn't enough. So maybe, Emma thought bitterly, maybe she did want to walk into that glittering hall, not as the forgotten ex, not as the one who got left behind, but as someone who had learned to stand again, someone who could look him in the eyes and not break. That thought, that single ember of defiance, was what made her say yes, now, standing by the window. She felt the weight of that decision pressing down. What had she been thinking? She didn't belong there. The invitation card sat on her kitchen counter. A beautiful white envelope sealed with gold. She picked it up again, reading the name embossed across the front, the Grand Solace Hotel. It sounded elegant, unreachable, like the name of a place that existed only in movies. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Leela's message flashed on the screen. "Don't even think about backing out. I'll be at your door by 6. Wear something that makes you feel dangerous." Emma smiled despite herself. Her friend always had a way of making the impossible sound like an adventure. She set the phone down and walked toward her small wardrobe, staring at the limited choices inside, a few office blouses, 2 old formal dresses, and 1 black evening gown she had bought years ago for a company dinner that got canceled. She had never worn it. Maybe this was the night. She slipped it on carefully, the fabric hugging her figure in a way that startled her. For a brief second, she didn't see the woman who was left behind, but someone new, someone stronger. Her heart raced at the thought of what tomorrow might bring. She didn't know that one night would change her entire story. The next evening arrived faster than expected. The city was alive with movement, cars humming along the main boulevard, the hum of laughter spilling from cafes, and the glow of the Grand Solace rising like a palace of light against the night sky. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she stepped out of the cab. The hotel's marble steps seemed endless, its glass doors reflecting her anxious expression. She took a breath and whispered to herself, "You can do this. You've faced worse." Then she walked inside. The lobby was breathtaking, filled with the soft hum of classical music and the sparkle of chandeliers that looked like frozen constellations. Waiters moved gracefully, carrying trays of champagne. Women in gowns whispered greetings. Men in tuxedos laughed in low, confident tones. Emma followed Leela into the grand ballroom, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor, trying to look like she belonged. And then it happened. A voice from behind that she hadn't heard in almost a year. A voice that made her spine stiffen like a wire. "Emma, is that you?" She turned, and there he was, Derek Hale, as perfect and polished as ever, dressed in a deep navy tuxedo that screamed wealth, his hair perfectly styled, his arm casually draped around the waist of the woman beside him, the same woman Emma had seen in magazines, social columns, and restaurant openings, Vanessa Carmichael. "Derek," Emma said with a polite smile. "Her throat tight, Vanessa," she added softly. Vanessa gave a look that could slice marble, her red lips curving into something resembling warmth, but feeling more like mockery. "Oh, Emma, how lovely to see you here. I didn't know your company received invitations to events like this," Emma swallowed, forcing herself not to flinch. "My firm was invited, yes. I'm here on behalf of the marketing team," she replied calmly. Trying to sound collected, Derek nodded slowly. Scanning her from head to toe, "You look different. It suits you," he said, in that tone people use when they mean the opposite. Something inside her cracked, a tremor of embarrassment, anger, and old pain twisting together. And that's when Vanessa tilted her head and asked with false sweetness, "So did you come alone? Or did you finally find someone who can handle all that ambition you have?" Emma's mouth went dry. She could feel the weight of everyone around them. Even though no one was watching, the silence inside her screamed. She needed to say something, anything. She couldn't let them think she was the same girl they had once looked down on. And then, as if fate had heard her plea, her eyes caught sight of a man across the ballroom, tall, sharp, effortlessly confident. Standing by the gallery window with a glass of champagne, the crowd seemed to bend around him without realizing it. As if his presence alone created space, he wasn't smiling. But his calm expression carried authority. His black tuxedo looked tailored by a sculptor rather than a tailor. His name was whispered between groups of guests, Alexander Reed, CEO of Reed Enterprises, a name that dominated the tech and finance columns every week. Without thinking, Emma's feet moved. "Excuse me?" she murmured to Derek and Vanessa, and before she could stop herself, she was walking toward the man everyone called untouchable. The guards near him moved instantly. But she raised a trembling hand. "Please," she said quietly. "Just give me a second," and somehow her tone made them hesitate. Alexander turned, his eyes meeting hers. They were a deep gray, unreadable, intelligent and sharp enough to cut glass. He studied her, confusion flickering briefly across his face. She felt her breath leave her chest the next moment. Words escaped her mouth before she could control them. "There you are, love. I've been looking everywhere for you," she said loud enough for Derek and Vanessa to hear. The ballroom stilled, heads turned. Derek froze in mid-sentence. Vanessa blinked in disbelief. Alexander's gaze sharpened, his expression shifting from mild confusion to intrigue. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, to Emma's utter shock, his lips curved slightly. Just enough to make it believable, he extended his hand and said in a low, calm voice that seemed to command the air itself, "And here I thought you'd abandon me for the dessert table." Emma exhaled the breath she didn't realize she was holding. She took his hand, and the warmth of his palm steadied her. The room's tension shifted, murmurs rippled. Alexander slipped an arm gently around her waist. Turning to face the others, "My apologies," he said to his bodyguards. "She's with me." In that moment, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safety. She looked up at him, unsure whether to thank him or faint. He leaned down slightly and whispered so quietly only she could hear, "You have 10 seconds to explain this, miss." "Linton," she whispered. "Emma Linton, please. My ex and his fiancée are over there. They were about to humiliate me. I panicked. I'm sorry. I'll leave right after this, I promise." Alexander's eyes stayed on hers. And something unreadable flickered behind them. Amusement, maybe respect. He didn't look angry. Instead, he whispered back, "You're lucky I'm bored tonight." Then he straightened, the faintest smile still lingering on his face. "Shall we get some air, Emma?" he asked aloud. "Yes, please," she said softly, her heart pounding. He guided her toward the terrace doors with a calm authority that made everyone step aside. And as they passed, Emma caught a glimpse of Derek's frozen face and Vanessa's furious confusion. For the first time in months, she didn't feel small. The terrace opened to the cool night breeze, the city glowing beneath them like spilled starlight. Alexander released her slowly, folding his hands behind his back. His eyes softened slightly as he said, "You owe me an explanation." Emma nodded, her voice trembling. "You're right, I didn't want them to see me as the failure they think I am. I know it was stupid, but I was desperate. I'll leave right now if you want me to." He tilted his head, studying her with quiet curiosity. "You walked across a room full of power brokers, lead to one of the richest men in the country, and did it all with a straight face," he said slowly. "That's not desperation, that's courage." "Miss Linton?" Emma blinked, speechless. The wind lifted her hair gently. "Her heart's still racing, so you're not mad?" "Not yet," Alexander said with a faint smirk. "But tell me, what's your plan now? Because I suspect you didn't think that far ahead." Emma gave a small, embarrassed laugh. "I didn't, honestly. I just wanted to survive the moment." Alexander looked back through the glass doors at the ballroom, where Derek and Vanessa were pretending not to stare. "Well then," he said finally, turning back to her, "if you're going to convince them, you might as well do it properly. For the rest of the night, Miss Linton, or should I say, my date, you're staying right here with me?" Her eyes widened. "You'd actually do that?" He smiled faintly. "You've given me the most interesting night of the year. I'd say that's worth seeing through." And as he offered his hand once more, the lights of the city reflected in his eyes. Emma hesitated for only a moment before she placed her hand in his. "Then let's make them believe it," she whispered. The performance of Hearts the Ballroom shimmered like a dream dipped in gold as Emma and Alexander stepped back inside, the air humming with murmurs, curiosity, and the soft music of violins that filled the corners of the vast hall. Emma could feel the weight of every glance following them, her pulse fluttering in her throat. But Alexander moved with the calm confidence of a man who owned every inch of the room. His hand remained lightly on her waist, his touch steady and controlled, but it was enough to ground her, enough to keep her from trembling. Every step they took together seemed deliberate, almost choreographed, as if they had rehearsed this moment all their lives. Alexander leaned slightly toward her as they moved through the crowd, his voice smooth and low. "You're doing remarkably well for someone who just invented an entire relationship out of thin air," he murmured. The faintest trace of amusement hiding in his tone. Emma tried to smile, her lips trembling just enough to betray her nerves. "I'm trying to look like I belong," she whispered back. "But my heart's having an argument with my lungs?" Alexander chuckled softly, the sound warm and quiet. "Then let's give them something to talk about, Miss Linton. It's no fun if we don't sell the story properly." They reached the center of the ballroom where the chandeliers spilled light like melted stars. A live jazz ensemble began to play a soft, slow tune, and couples began to drift toward the dance floor. Alexander turned to face her fully, his gray eyes glinting beneath the soft golden light. "May I?" he asked, offering his hand. Emma's breath caught. For a moment, her thoughts screamed that this was madness, that she couldn't possibly dance here in front of everyone. But then she remembered Vanessa's smirk, Derek's mocking tone, and the hollow ache she'd felt for months after he left. This wasn't just about pretending anymore. It was about reclaiming her place, her confidence, her worth. She nodded, slipping her hand into his, his fingers closing around hers gently but firmly, leading her to the dance floor where the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. As they began to move, the first notes of the music rising around them, Emma felt her pulse synchronize with the rhythm. Alexander's hand guided her effortlessly, his movements fluid and composed, the kind of grace that came from years of power and poise. His other hand rested against the small of her back, steady and warm, and she realized she didn't have to know the steps he was leading every one. "Relax," he whispered near her ear, his breath barely brushing her skin. "If you keep staring at the floor, people will think you're counting tiles." Emma forced herself to lift her chin. Meeting his gaze, the world blurred behind him. All the glittering people, the chatter, the noise, everything melted away until there was only him and the quiet. Magnetic gravity between them. She had never been this close to someone like him. Someone who carried power like a second skin and yet seemed capable of gentleness too. "Tell me," he said softly as they turned, "why did you let him hurt you so much?" The question struck her like a ripple beneath calm water. Unexpected and deep, she blinked. "I didn't," she whispered automatically. But even she didn't believe the words. Alexander raised a brow slightly. "You did," he said, not accusingly, but with quiet certainty. "You're still letting him hurt you now. You're here tonight not to celebrate yourself, but to prove something to someone who doesn't deserve proof." Emma swallowed hard, her voice small. "You sound like you've done this before." Alexander's lips curved slightly. "I've been where you are. Not exactly, but close enough. I've spent years surrounded by people who want to see you small. Because it makes them feel taller, the trick is, you stop caring. And you win by simply refusing to play." His words sank into her like sunlight breaking through fog. She wasn't used to hearing truth spoken so plainly, especially not from someone like him. The song changed. The tempo slowed even more. And Alexander didn't let go. He twirled her gently, his movements effortless. The air between them, humming with an invisible tension. Emma felt herself exhale for the first time in hours, her nerves melting into the rhythm, and for one fleeting moment, she forgot everything. The lies, the pretense, the stares, and just let herself exist. Here, in this improbable dance, when the music ended, applause rippled across the room. Emma realized people had actually stopped to watch them. A few guests smiled approvingly, whispering to one another. She even caught Vanessa's expression, tight, brittle, forced, and Derek's jaw set hard with something that almost looked like jealousy. The sight sent a quiet satisfaction through her. Not the vengeful kind, but the kind that whispered, "You've risen." As the next song began, Alexander guided her to a nearby table near the balcony doors. The lights dimmed slightly as waiters refilled champagne glasses. "You handled that beautifully," he said, offering her a glass. "Not bad for someone who didn't have a plan 10 minutes ago." Emma smiled faintly. "Thank you for everything. You didn't have to do any of this." He took a sip. Watching her thoughtfully, "Maybe not. But I wanted to. You remind me of someone I used to know." She tilted her head. "Who?" He looked down for a moment, his eyes distant. "A woman who taught me that strength doesn't come from power or money, but from how much of yourself you can keep after the world tries to take it away," he said quietly. "She was my mother." Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. "She sounds incredible." He smiled faintly. "She was." "She would have liked you," Emma blinked in surprise, feeling something shift in the air between them. It wasn't flirtation, not yet. It was understanding. Recognition, the kind of connection that forms quietly. Without permission, she set her glass down. Trying to steady herself, "You barely know me," she said softly. "I know courage when I see it," Alexander replied simply, before she could respond. A familiar voice interrupted the fragile moment. "Emma," Derek said, approaching their table with Vanessa trailing behind him like a shadow of silk and diamonds. His smile was tight, practiced. "I hope I'm not interrupting. You are," Alexander said smoothly without missing a beat. His voice was calm but carried the kind of authority that made even seasoned executives hesitate. Derek's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered. "I just wanted to congratulate Emma. It's surprising to see her here and with you, Mr. Reed. I didn't realize you two knew each other." Alexander's gaze didn't waver. "Emma doesn't need your surprise. She's far more capable than you ever gave her credit for," he said, his tone cool but razor sharp. "And as for how we met, some connections don't need your approval." "Mr. Hale," Vanessa's fake smile stiffened. "We didn't mean anything by it," she said quickly. "It's just, well, such an unexpected pairing." Alexander leaned back slightly, his voice silk over steel. "Unexpected things are often the best kind, don't you think?" Vanessa opened her mouth, but no words came out. Derek looked flustered for the first time since Emma had known him, and that alone felt like a quiet triumph, asterisk after a moment. Alexander rose from his chair and offered his hand to Emma. "Come on, love. I believe you promised me another dance." Emma smiled, slipping her hand into his. "I did, didn't I?" she said softly as they walked away. She could feel Derek's eyes burning into her back, and for the first time, she didn't care. When they reached the dance floor again, Emma looked up at Alexander. Her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you do that?" "You didn't have to defend me." Alexander's expression softened. "Because you deserve to be defended, Emma. And because I can." The next song began. Slow and haunting, and they moved together again. This time, less as strangers and more as something unspoken. Something forming quietly between heartbeats. Emma realized that the way he looked at her wasn't out of pity or performance. It was real. Steady, grounded. He wasn't looking at the woman pretending to belong. He was looking at the woman who already did. Asterisk. As the night stretched on, they spoke more about life, choices, dreams, and the strange loneliness of success. Emma found herself laughing, genuinely laughing. For the first time in months, Alexander listened. Really listened. As if her words carried weight, and each time their hands brushed, something small but powerful sparked between them. A warmth she hadn't felt in a very long time. Later, as the gala began to wind down, Alexander escorted her to the terrace again. The city lay beneath them, endless and alive. "You did it," he said quietly. "You walked into a room that was never built for you and owned it." Emma smiled, her eyes shining under the moonlight. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You could have," he replied. "You just needed someone to remind you who you are." The silence that followed was gentle. Charged, he looked at her, really looked, and something shifted. Something deeper than gratitude. Her breath hitched. But before she could say anything, he turned slightly toward the city lights, his voice quiet again. "This was supposed to be pretend, but for some reason, it doesn't feel like it anymore." Emma's heart fluttered, caught between disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. The night had started as an act, a desperate performance to hide her pain. But somewhere between the champagne, the dance, and his words, the lines had blurred for the first time. She didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, and that terrified her more than anything. Asterisk, the morning after the masquerade, the sunlight that slipped through the curtains the next morning felt softer than usual. Pale gold that touched the edge of Emma's small apartment with the tenderness of a secret. She lay there for a long moment, blinking at the ceiling. Half convinced that the night before had been a dream, her phone rested on the bedside table, buzzing endlessly with messages. And when she finally reached for it, the screen exploded with notifications, dozens of texts from Lila, 3 missed calls, and a stream of social media alerts that made her heart race. She sat up quickly, her blanket falling to her lap. Her friends' messages filled the screen. "Emma, turn on the news. You're trending. What did you do last night?" Emma's pulse quickened. She opened her laptop, typed her own name into the search bar, and froze. There she was. Not one, but dozens of photos, her and Alexander Reed on the dance floor, his arm around her waist, his gaze fixed on her as though she were the only person in the room. The headline above one of the articles read, "Billionaire CEO Alexander Reed attends gala with mystery woman, sparks flying." Her mouth fell open. She scrolled down. Another site had posted a close-up of their dance. Captioned, "The CEO's secret girlfriend. Guests say they looked perfect together." "Oh no," Emma whispered under her breath. Pressing a hand to her forehead, she hadn't thought beyond that night. Hadn't imagined that pretending to be someone's girlfriend, especially someone like him, would spiral into citywide gossip. She grabbed her phone and called Leela immediately. "Emma Linton." Leela's voice burst through the speaker before Emma could even say hello. "You're all over the internet. I told you to make an impression, not to start a media storm." "I didn't start anything," Emma said. Pacing the floor, "It was one night, one dance. And the most eligible man in the country just looked at you like you hung the stars." "Emma, this is serious. Reporters are calling it the Reed revelation. They think you're his new girlfriend." Emma sat down on the couch, stunned. "Oh God, what do I do now?" "Well," Lila said, lowering her voice, "if you ask me, you could do worse. The man is gorgeous, powerful, and clearly smitten." "He's not smitten," Emma groaned. "He was helping me, that's all." "It was pretend. Pretend or not, sweetheart," Leela said. "You'd better figure out your next move, because once the press starts digging, they don't stop." Emma ended the call, her thoughts spinning. Her life had always been ordinary work, rent, quiet nights, coffee. Now suddenly she was in the headlines, linked to a man who belonged to a different world entirely. The realization made her stomach twist. She decided to go for a walk. Hoping the morning air would calm her mind, the city outside was already awake. Cars honking, people hurrying, the sky clear and bright. She walked past a cafe window and froze. The television inside was showing a live business news segment. And there was Alexander, walking into his office tower surrounded by reporters. Microphones flashing, asterisk, Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed. Is the mystery woman your girlfriend? Alexander paused, just long enough to say, no comment, his voice calm, his expression unreadable. Before security ushered him inside, Emma stood outside the cafe for a long time, her heart pounding. No comment, he had said, which wasn't a denial. It was something else. Her phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. Unknown. Good morning, Miss Linton. I trust you've seen the news. Please come to Reed Enterprises at noon. We should talk. Her knees nearly gave out. She reread the message 3 times before replying. Of course. I'll be there. Her fingers trembled as she typed, at noon sharp. She arrived at the Reed Enterprises headquarters, a tower of steel and glass that seemed to touch the clouds. The receptionist, a perfectly composed woman in a navy suit, smiled politely. Mr. Reed is expecting you. Miss Linton, the elevator ride felt endless. The floor numbers blinked upward in gold, her reflection in the mirrored walls revealing every trace of her nerves when the doors opened. A large office bathed in daylight stretched before her, minimalist, elegant, with shelves of awards and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. Alexander stood by the window, hands in his pockets. Wearing a charcoal suit that looked like it had been cut from the night sky, he turned when she entered, and for a second, the warmth in his eyes softened her fear. Miss Linton, he greeted, his voice smooth but quieter than she expected. You look less terrified than I imagined. Terrified is an understatement, she admitted. My phone's been exploding since sunrise, he nodded slightly, walking closer. I expected that. The press never sleeps. I should have anticipated it. But it seems our little performance was more convincing than either of us thought. I'm sorry, she said immediately. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I should have left before anyone saw us. This is all my fault. Alexander stopped a few feet away, his gaze steady. No, it's not. If anyone's at fault, it's me. I could have stopped the rumor before it began. But I didn't, she blinked, confused. Why didn't you? He exhaled slowly, turning his gaze to the city beyond the glass. Because for the first time in months, the media wasn't talking about mergers, or scandals, or profits. They were talking about something human. They were talking about you, and strangely enough, I didn't hate it. Emma stared at him, her pulse quickening. You mean, you're not angry? He looked back at her, the faintest smile touching his lips. On the contrary, I think we can use this. Use it? She repeated, You mean, pretend again? Asterisk, exactly, he said, walking behind his desk and picking up a file. The annual Reed Tech Summit is in 2 weeks. My board has been on my case about appearing more relatable. They think I'm too distant, too cold. A public romance might fix that image problem if you're willing. Of course, Emma's jaw dropped. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend again? He leaned against his desk, crossing his arms. Only until the storm dies down, I'll compensate you for your time. Naturally, she frowned, shaking her head. I'm not doing this for money. Mr. Reed, he smiled faintly. I didn't think you would. Which is exactly why I'm asking you. Emma's heart pounded. She wanted to say no, to walk away from the absurdity of it all. But something in his expression, that quiet sincerity beneath the armor of confidence, stopped her. You really think this will help? She asked softly. I do, he said. And I also think you could use this too. How? You said last night you wanted to prove you belonged. Here's your chance. Walk into rooms most people never see. Speak to people who think they own the world. And show them that you're not afraid to stand beside someone like me. She hesitated, her thoughts racing. And when it's over? Then you walk away, he said, but not as the same woman who walked in. There was a long pause. The hum of the city below filled the silence. Finally, Emma nodded slowly. All right, I'll do it, she said. But on one condition, you don't treat me like an employee. Alexander's eyes lit up. Faint amusement flickering across his face. You drive a hard bargain, Miss Linton. But agreed, he extended his hand. She shook it firmly. The warmth of his palm lingered longer than it should have, and when she looked up, their eyes met for a second too long. Welcome to the arrangement, he said quietly. Let's give them something real to believe in. The following days unfolded in a blur of preparation. Emma was fitted for events, briefed on Alexander's business schedule, and trailed by assistants who tried to teach her how to move through elite spaces without faltering. She learned how to smile for cameras, how to answer polite questions without giving away too much, and how to walk into a room full of billionaires without letting her hand shake. Asterisk. The edge of something real, the night of the education banquet, faded into memory. But its echoes refused to quiet. The photographs of Emma and Alexander dominated social media for days, her sapphire dress becoming a symbol of unexpected grace. Her face, once unknown now, carried a quiet magnetism that fascinated reporters and infuriated tabloids hungry for scandal. Yet beyond the glare of cameras, behind the walls of luxury hotels and conference halls, something far more delicate had begun to bloom. Alexander's office, once an austere world of glass and silence, had changed subtly since she began visiting regularly. There were now coffee mugs on the table, half-finished notes in her handwriting on his desk, the faint scent of her perfume drifting through the air when she left. Emma had become an unspoken constant in his days. She arrived each morning with her small notebook and determined smile, ready to survive another round of public appearances, but as the hours passed, the formal lines between arrangement and connection blurred until neither could remember which side of the fiction they were standing on. Sometimes he caught himself watching her when she spoke to his staff, calm, thoughtful, eyes bright with quiet intelligence, and he realized he was learning more about sincerity from her than from years of corporate mentors. Other times she found herself listening to his late-night calls with his board, hearing the exhaustion in his voice when the doors closed and the facade dropped for all his power. Alexander Reed was a man who hadn't been allowed to feel small in a very long time. One afternoon, after a long meeting, Alexander asked, "Do you ever wish we'd never met that night?" The question startled her. He was leaning by the window, sunlight falling across his shoulders like liquid gold. "If we hadn't," Emma replied after a pause, "I'd still be hiding from who I was. I'd still think I wasn't enough." Her words were quiet but certain. "So no, I don't regret it, not even a second." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that came from somewhere deep. "Neither do I," he murmured. His voice was almost too soft for her to hear, but she did, and it made her chest ache in a way she didn't understand. The next few days blurred into a whirlwind of appearances, business luncheons, and charity press events. Everywhere they went, eyes followed them. Questions floated in the air. "How long have you been together? Is it serious? Are you moving in together?" Alexander always answered with the same calm diplomacy. "We're happy," he'd say. "Nothing more, nothing less." And the simplicity of his words seemed to make people believe them even more. Emma began noticing things she hadn't before. The way he subtly positioned himself between her and aggressive reporters. How he lowered his voice when speaking to her in a crowd, as if they shared a private world no one else could enter. How he always offered her his arm, even when no cameras were around. Each gesture was small, yet each one whispered something unspoken. Something dangerously close to genuine care, but fame and rumors came with shadows. One evening, as she left her apartment building, a pair of journalists ambushed her at the door. Cameras flashing like lightning, "Miss Linton. Are you engaged to Alexander Reed? Are the rumors about the trip to Paris true?" Her hands trembled. No comment, she managed, before hurrying inside a waiting car that Alexander had sent for her. She pressed her palms against her knees, heart pounding. "This is getting out of control," she whispered. When she arrived at his penthouse later that night, she found him waiting near the grand piano. his jacket off, tie loosened, a glass of water in his hand instead of wine. He looked up as she entered, concern flickering across his face. "They followed you again," he said, rather than asked. She nodded. "I can't keep doing this, Alexander. It's all becoming too real. People think I'm someone I'm not." He placed the glass down slowly, walking toward her. "And who do you think you are, Emma? I'm not the woman they write about. I'm not the headline. I'm just a girl from a one-bedroom apartment trying not to trip over herself in borrowed heels." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint lines near his eyes, the quiet fatigue beneath his calm. "And maybe that's exactly why you matter," he said gently. "Do you know what people see when they look at us? They don't see money or headlines. They see honesty. They see a woman who doesn't pretend to be perfect. They see someone real." His words struck something inside her, a fragile place she had kept hidden even from herself. "You talk like you actually believe that," she said, her voice trembling. "I do," he replied simply. "Because when I'm with you, I remember that life isn't supposed to be calculated. It's supposed to be felt. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy with awareness. The city lights beyond the window shimmered, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as if time itself had paused to listen. His gaze fell to her lips, then back to her eyes, and the air between them tightened like a thread ready to break. He reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek, his touch feather-light. "If this weren't pretend," he whispered, "would you still be here with me tonight?" Emma's breath caught. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to let the truth spill out, but fear knotted inside her. "That's not part of the deal," she said softly. Even though every part of her wished it were, he stepped back slowly, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face before he masked it again. "Of course," he said quietly. "Forgive me. I forgot where the lines are." She couldn't sleep that night. Every memory of his voice, every glance, every word replayed like a song she couldn't turn off. By morning, she decided she needed distance. She texted him, "I think we should pause this arrangement for a few days. I need space." Hours later, she sat in a small park near the river, her phone silent beside her for the first time in weeks. She was alone, without schedules or cameras. The quiet should have comforted her, but instead it felt hollow. She missed his presence, the steadiness he brought into her chaos, the way he made her believe she could belong anywhere. Then, unexpectedly, her phone rang, an unknown number again. She almost ignored it, but answered. "Emma Linton." A sharp voice said, "This is Rachel Hart from the Financial Chronicle. I'm calling regarding a story we're about to publish on Alexander Reed's so-called mystery partner. We've uncovered records that suggest you once worked at a marketing firm connected to a competitor of Reed Enterprises. Care to comment?" Emma's stomach dropped. "What? That's ridiculous. So you deny any professional link?" The reporter pressed. "Of course I do," Emma said firmly. "This has nothing to do with his company." But by the next morning, the story had already broken. Headlines screamed accusations of manipulation, implying that she had faked the relationship for profit. Photographs were twisted into narratives. Anonymous sources claimed she had been planted by rivals. The online world turned cruel within hours, comments pouring in like acid rain when she arrived at the Reed building. Security hesitated before letting her in. Her ID photo flashed red on the system temporarily restricted access. Her chest tightened. She took the private elevator anyway. Heart hammering, when the doors opened, Alexander stood near his desk, a newspaper in hand, his expression unreadable. "So," he said slowly, "I suppose you've seen it. Asterisk." "Yes," she whispered. "It's all lies, Alexander. You know that." He set the paper down carefully. "I do, but the board doesn't. They're demanding an investigation. Investors are panicking. And the media's turned this into a circus?" She stepped closer. "Then tell them the truth." He looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw hesitation. "If I tell them the truth, that this started as an act, they'll call me reckless. They'll say I fabricated an image to manipulate public opinion. Either way, someone loses. So you're saying I should disappear?" Her voice cracked. He closed his eyes briefly. "I'm saying that maybe the storm needs distance to die down." Emma stared at him. every part of her aching. "You're the one who told me to stop caring what the world thinks. And now you want me to vanish because of it?" He turned toward the window, the reflection of the city casting fractured light across his face. "It's not what I want. It's what's safest for you." She shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "No, Alexander. This isn't about safety. It's about fear. You're afraid that if you stand by me, they'll see you as human." Her words hit harder than she intended. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a heartbeat, neither moved. She could see the battle in his eyes, duty against desire, control against truth. Then he whispered, "Emma, please. Just give me time." She turned toward the elevator, her voice trembling. "Time's what cowards ask for when they can't make a choice." The doors closed between them. And for the first time since that night at the gala, she felt the weight of loneliness crash down again. The headlines had built a story she never asked for. The world had fallen silent around her, but deep inside, beneath all the noise, one truth kept burning. She hadn't fallen for the arrangement. She had fallen for the man, and somewhere high above the city, in an office made of glass and distance, Alexander Reed stood alone, staring at the empty elevator doors, realizing that for all his control, he had finally found something he couldn't negotiate: his own heart. Asterisk. The truth that changed everything. Rain traced silver lines down the tall windows of Emma's apartment, each drop carrying the echo of the week she had spent in silence. The city moved on as it always did, unbothered by broken hearts or ruined reputations. But inside her world, everything had slowed to the rhythm of waiting. Waiting for a message that never came, waiting for a call that never arrived, waiting for a man who had once promised to stand beside her and had vanished behind corporate glass walls. She tried to fill the hours with work, but her inbox had grown quieter too. Clients hesitating to associate with her after the headlines. Each click of her keyboard felt like trying to rebuild a life from ashes. Lila visited once, armed with sympathy and takeout coffee. "You can't disappear like this. She had said, "you didn't do anything wrong. You were honest. They twisted it. That's on them. Not on you." But Emma had only smiled faintly, because truth felt meaningless when shouted down by rumor. Still at night, when the world dimmed, her thoughts drifted back to Alexander, to the sound of his voice when he said her name, to the warmth in his eyes that had never been for the cameras. She hated that she missed him, hated that she still checked her phone before sleeping, hoping his name would appear. She reminded herself that she had survived worse, and yet, something inside her whispered that this heartbreak was different. It was born from something real, something that had never been meant to happen, but did. Then, one Thursday morning, everything changed. She woke to another storm of messages. But this time they weren't from tabloids or gossip feeds. They were from news outlets quoting him, Alexander Reed. Her hands shook as she opened the first headline. "Alexander Reed breaks silence. She deserves the truth." The article unfolded like sunlight after weeks of gray. During a live press conference at the Reed Tech Summit, Alexander had faced hundreds of reporters alone. Refusing pre-approved statements, he had spoken plainly. His words broadcast across every major channel. "Emma Linton did not manipulate anyone," he had said. "Our relationship began from an impulsive moment of honesty. And while it was not planned, it became real in ways neither of us expected. If anyone is to blame for this story, it is me. Because I was the one who asked her to continue the act for my benefit. She showed more integrity in a room full of billionaires than most men I know. And I will not let her name be dragged through mud for having a heart." Emma read the paragraph 3 times before it sank in. He had told the world everything, the truth she thought he'd bury to protect his empire. He had risked his image for hers. Her phone began ringing again. Lila screaming with joy. "Emma, he just detonated a PR bomb for you. He told them he loves you." But Emma didn't hear the rest. She was already out the door. Heart pounding, raincoat half buttoned, racing toward the street. She didn't know what she'd say, or if she'd even be allowed past security. She just knew she couldn't stay silent anymore when she reached the Reed headquarters. A crowd of reporters flooded the plaza, security guards trying to contain them. Cameras turned instantly when they recognized her. Flashes exploding like lightning. Miss Linton? Have you spoken to Mr. Reed? Do you forgive him? Is it true you plan to sue the Chronicle? She pushed through the questions, her voice barely steady. Excuse me. Please, and the guards, recognizing her, parted without hesitation. Upstairs, the executive floor was quieter than she remembered. Almost sacred in its stillness, the receptionist looked at her with wide eyes. He's still in the boardroom, Miss Linton. But Emma didn't wait for permission. She walked straight down the corridor, her heels clicking like small thunderclaps, and pushed the glass doors open inside. The board sat in stunned silence, a dozen suits frozen mid-discussion. Alexander stood at the head of the table, tie loosened, the faintest trace of exhaustion beneath his composed expression. When he saw her, the controlled mask slipped. Replaced by something raw relief, maybe disbelief, the room murmured, Miss Linton, security, but she lifted her chin. It's all right, Alexander said quietly, waving a hand. You may all give us the room, no one argued. Within moments, the boardroom emptied, leaving the two of them alone in the cavernous space filled with rainlight. Emma's voice trembled, but carried fire. You didn't have to do that, Alexander. You just burned every safety net you had. He smiled faintly. Tired but sure, I built those nets myself. I can rebuild them. What I couldn't rebuild was what I broke with you. She swallowed hard. Why did you tell them everything? Because, he said, taking a slow step closer, I realized I was protecting the wrong thing. I was guarding my reputation when I should have been guarding the truth. I was letting fear run my life. And you were the only person who ever called me out on it. Her eyes glistened. They'll tear you apart in the press, then let them, he replied softly. You once said fear is what keeps people small. I'm done being small. The words settled between them. Heavy and perfect, Emma felt tears spill before she could stop them. I didn't want this to ruin you, he reached out, wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. You didn't ruin me, Emma. You reminded me I still have a heart. I'm just sorry. I realized it too late. She laughed weakly through the tears. Maybe not too late. For a long moment neither of them moved, the city humming far below. Thunder rolling like applause in the distance. Then he said quietly, You once asked if I'd still want you here if it weren't pretend? The answer's yes. Always yes. She closed the distance between them. And this time, when his hands found her waist, there were no cameras, no lies, no performance. Just a people who had finally stopped pretending. The kiss that followed wasn't cinematic or rehearsed. It was trembling, human, filled with every apology they hadn't spoken and every truth they'd tried to deny. It was the kind of kiss that rebuilt worlds when they finally pulled apart. The storm outside had softened to drizzle. The gray light spilled over them like a blessing. So, she whispered, smiling through the remnants of tears, What happens now? Now, he said, we start from the beginning. No pretense. No headlines, just us. Asterisk, months later. The scandal had long since burned out. The Financial Chronicle retracted its article. The public moved on to newer gossip. And Reed Enterprises emerged stronger than before. Alexander refused to let the company distance itself from the truth. Instead, he built a new foundation, one centered on transparency and human connection. Emma returned to her work, not as a figure in someone else's shadow, but as the co-founder of a joint initiative they started together, came mentorship fund for women in business who had been silenced or overlooked. At the launch event, reporters once again filled the room, flashes lighting every corner. But this time, Emma didn't flinch. She stood beside Alexander on the stage, her voice clear as she addressed the crowd a year ago. I walked into a ballroom thinking I didn't belong. I learned that belonging doesn't come from wealth or status. It comes from courage. The courage to stand, to fall, and to keep standing again. And sometimes, if you're lucky, someone will stand beside you, not to complete you, but to remind you that you were whole all along. Applause erupted. Cameras clicked, but none of it mattered anymore. She turned to Alexander, his hand finding hers with quiet certainty, and together they smiled, not for headlines, not for show, but for the simple miracle of having survived the storm and found light on the other side. That night, as the city glowed beneath them, Alexander whispered, "Do you remember the first thing you ever said to me?" Emma laughed softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Yes," I said. "There you are, love." And I meant it as a lie. He smiled, kissing her forehead. "And now?" "Now," she said, her eyes shining. "I mean it as the truth." Outside, the rain finally stopped, and the city lights reflected off the wet streets like rivers of gold, a silent reminder that even storms, no matter how fierce, must eventually give way to calm.